In this unit, we will look at factors that led to change in Vermont in the mid-19th century. If we look at a list of today's Vermont town names, an interesting pattern emerges. Some towns have names like North Bennington, South Burlington, which makes sense. They are indeed north or south of the towns of the same name. But there are a number of towns that appear to be split into two sections not related to obvious geography. Most of these include the name Center. The original names were determined when Benning Wentworth, governor of New Hampshire, creatively interpreted the described boundaries of New Hampshire to include all the land we now know as Vermont. He broke this area into grants, each about 6 miles square, and made a tidy profit for the crown and no doubt for himself, selling them to speculators and settlers. New York laid claim to the same land, petitioned the king to stop Wentworth, and in 1770 declared all the Wentworth grants invalid. They also declared that the current residents must repurchase from New York the land they had already paid New Hampshire for. This infuriated residents of the area, including those master speculators, Ira and Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys. They objected. This general rebellion against the New York governor ultimately led to the establishment of the self-declared Vermont Republic. Despite those early wranglings, the names that were already in place by 1770 stayed in place as Vermont became a state in 1791. So when did things change? Let's start with where town centers were situated. People are usually surprised to learn that many Vermont towns were established on top of hills. If we look at a topographical map of Manchester, for example, we see that the original town was on a hill several hundred feet higher than the later Manchester center. Why would people walking, riding, or driving wagons settle on top of a hill? When settlers arrived, they found the valleys to be inhospitable places, choked with brush and fallen trees, all of which would have to be cleared before planting. The tops of hills, by contrast, were often found to have fewer trees and many meadows with hay all ready for cattle to graze on. Why? Yes, beavers had already done much of the work of clearing trees. In the short Vermont growing season, building where you could get a crop in the ground quickly was worth some hill climbing. As towns became established, the lower areas could eventually be cleared, and this became increasingly important as all those rapid-running streams and rivers found at the bottom of hills became a good source of power to run mills. So we see the first movement of town centers from hills down to valleys. But there were still plenty of reasons for people to live on hillsides. Sheep do better on hills, where they are less prone to the foot diseases that come with lowland conditions. In the great sheep boom of the early 19th century, sheep dominated the hillsides, and town centers continued to thrive on hilltops as well. Even into the 1850s, after the sheep boom had passed, the census still shows that sheep were an important component of successful Vermont farms, as seen in this listing from Colchester. But they were soon replaced by cows who, like sheep, were still quite happy to live on hillsides. Wool can be stored and then sold when the price is good. Even cheese, which traveled reasonably well by wagon, could be sold to faraway markets like Boston. But dairy products like liquid milk and butter must be consumed fairly quickly. For this they needed to rely on the beasts that did not find the hillsides hospitable. Trains. In the mid-19th century, trains came to Vermont. Though they were built piecemeal, with much competition and fighting, they were indeed built, and they were built, for the most part, in the flatter, low-lying areas. All along the railroad routes, depots, even tiny ones like this one, were set up. Dairy farmers would travel down from their hill farms, bringing their milk and butter to be loaded on trains bound for New York or Boston. Some of those numbers are staggering. For example, the 1870 Colchester Agricultural Census lists that the 110 dairy farms of Colchester produced 74,775 pounds of butter, 137,800 pounds of cheese, and 44,895 gallons of milk. Railroads also opened the door to increase tourism, and town populations began to grow around the train depots. Eventually, railroads gave way to the roads and highways. But they left their mark on the Vermont landscape with their legacy of split names. Drive through any of these split towns, and you will see instantly that they are divided not by geographic direction like north, south, east, west, but by elevation. Hills where you will find the original town centers, and flats are where the train stopped. What other factors changed Vermont during the mid-19th century? That is the focus of this unit.